acknowledge that this event is being held on the homeland of the Dakota people, who have stewarded it for millennia and who care for it to this day. The Dakota people are part of the 7 council fires historically called the Great Sioux Nation. We also acknowledge the Ojibwe, Ho-Chunk, and other nations of indigenous people who call this place home. We pay respect to their elders, past and present. Dakota lands and waters were unfairly ceded in the treaties of 1837 and 1851, and we acknowledge that these treaties, made under duress, have entitled non-Native people to live and work on Native lands. And we acknowledge the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, settlement, and resettlement that allowed Minnesota's capital city of St. Paul to exist as it does today, at the confluence of the Minnesota and Mississippi rivers, known to many Dakota people as Bedote. It is a place where rivers and people have come together for at least 10,000 years. According to oral tradition, it is one of the places from which the Dakota people originate. But despite all of that hardship, the Dakota people, indigenous people across this land, thrive today. Our next presenter is a published poet. She holds a Master's of Fine Arts and is currently a PhD candidate in the inaugural cohort of the University of Minnesota's American Indian and Indigenous Studies program. She's a student of the Dakota language and a recent fellow at Milkweed Editions, an independent publisher that believes that literature has the power to change the way we see the world. Please join me in welcoming Kachina Yeager. Kachina.
Hachanoashte, good morning. Ampetugde yushke wachia kapie, Kachina makiapie, Damakota, Tintuita emata, Oyatumitawa kihana, Brewakantua echiapie. My name is Kachina. I am Dakota. I'm from a place called Prairie Island, Tintuita, here in Minnesota Makoche, and my people are called Brewakantua. Which has a few translations, but essentially is people either born of the waters or those who dwell near the sacred lake. And so, being a person of here, I wanted to take this moment to expand on the land acknowledgement that we just heard. Not only is this Dakota land, but it's important that you know a more robust history of how this land came to be stolen. The story of the land is the story of all of us, after all. Since time immemorial, Dakota people have inhabited this place, Minnesota Makoche, Minnesota. We know ourselves to be literally born of this place. The land, water, lives inside of us, and we live inside of them too. In this way, we are more than neighbors. We are kin, relatives. And so, by 1851, the settler colonial state and federal governments knew the best way to enact genocidal removal of the Dakota in order to make space for the ever-expanding settlement was to deliberately disrupt and hinder the land, water, sky, people relationship and connection. A set of treaties was designed to do just that. The treaties of Traverse des Sioux and Mendota, in particular, in 1851. These treaties were the result of petitions made, made to the federal government by the likes of extremely prominent Minnesotans, particularly Alexander Ramsey and Henry Hastings Sibley. Between the two treaties, nearly all of Dakota land in Minnesota was swindled away from the people. Deliberate mistranslations by missionaries Riggs and the Pond brothers aided in this swindling. Concepts of ownership and removal simply did not exist in our language, and the attempts of English approximation were shallow at best. Indeed, comparing the English and Dakotiapi versions of the treaty documents side by side reveals the extent of the heinous linguistic discrepancies. In the end, the Dakota were forcibly moved to a reservation on the banks of the Minnesota River in the far western reaches of the state. By 1862, the people were starving, restricted to the bounds of the reservation, foodways disrupted and depleted, forced by settler intervention to farming, which the Dakota tried, but after harsh winter and drought, little remained. Further, the legally agreed upon treaty terms ensuring annuity payments of money, food, and supplies to the Dakota people were being held hostage by traders who had colluded with the architects of the treaties to sneak in language that essentially gave the traders power to falsify documents of debts owed to them by individual Dakota people and take payment in the form of the annuities the people desperately needed. In many cases, these annuities rotted behind locked doors. Survival literally left to spoil rather than sustain the Dakota, an attempt to eradicate an entire people simply to steal property, to accrue an unholy wealth. Starving and sick and so tired of watching their people suffer, the Dakota War of 1862 sparked. Though many casualties were inflicted on both sides, the suffering of the Dakota people increased tenfold following the fighting. The Dakota were rounded up into concentration camps at Fort Snelling, at Pedote, the place we know is our birth. They were separated by gender, where they spent that terrible winter watching immense swaths of their people perish from both starvation and from settler sicknesses. Over 300 Dakota men faced potential death for their alleged involvement in the war. Their trials had no translators, and many notably didn't last longer than 5 minutes. In the end, President Lincoln, mercifully, dismissed all but 40 of these men's death charges. On December 26, 1862, the day after Christmas, 38 Dakota were hung in Mankato, Minnesota, where countless settler families gathered in merriment to watch these murders be carried out. It remains the largest mass execution ordered in the United States. Just months later, both the federal and state governments passed legislation removing the Dakota from Minnesota in perpetuity. Despite contemporary efforts to repeal this, and despite its lack of enforcement, these laws currently remain on the books. Despite their absolute best efforts, the colonial nation-state failed to eradicate the Dakota, and so here we too remain. Yet, it is pertinent to emphasize that this genocidal aim of the settler colonial project does not exist solely in the historical. Rather, it is an ongoing force. It is not an event, but an ever-evolving structure within which we still live. Still, Dakota access to our land and water and sky-based kin relationships are disrupted. Still, settler occupation remains. It is difficult to be Indigenous and notice the similarities this kind of genocidal violence shares with the continued starving and bombarding of Gaza and Palestine being carried out by US-backed settler nations. It is difficult to be Indigenous and watch each new cycle of colonial violence circle back into the contemporary moment. Currently, here in St. Paul, Imnija Ska Otume, where I live and work and continue to tend my relationship to land and water and sky, this reiteration of ongoing settler violence reflects back on me every day in endless ways. My people are continually crossed by boundaries and systems and expectations and names not of our own choosing. We are a nation of people spread across great distances, flung into diaspora, and yet we persist. How does one contain all of this still simplified version of our story, into a singular moment of land acknowledgement? And so, as you continue this vital work of childhood land access, I urge you to remember how it is that you've come to be in a position of privilege to negotiate these accesses. I urge you to consider what material and tangible means by which you can be part of restoring not only Dakota access to Dakota lands, but Indigenous access to Indigenous lands across the nation and globe. As a person deeply of here, I'd like to share a poem about this place and my continued love for it now. This poem is called Everything is Two Rivers for Me. Pedote, Mississippi meeting Minnesota, two waters swirl into each other, birth a people. Onachitachanku, Milky Way, more literally spirit spine. We know it is a river you flow back into when you leave this world. Tintoita, Prairie Island, cradled between Vermilion and the Mighty One, all our most precious memories, a wetland suspended in rivers. Mississippi, backbone to the skeletal system of my waterways, everything else spills into, flows out of. We pluck books from the shelf by their spines, all that pulp gathered and sewn. But what if archive traded paper for buckets of water on shelves? One bucket from lake, one of the tears shed for it. One bucket from river, one from the bodies of those who love it, and so on and so on and so on, until library is liquid, until memory is turned mani. And so we share our memories and histories with the places that have formed us, and as such, they endure. In many ways, this connectivity is part of what has enabled us to endure through the historic and contemporary horrors we have faced. Further, this connectivity to land, and of course, by extension, water and sky and stars, is part of what continues to be the joy of aliveness, the joy of Dakota-ness. And so whether it is memory stored in river or memory contained in the gentle shell of a hidden seed, we are still here, still returning, still continuing. And in the spirit of continuance, I am beyond delighted to introduce someone who I feel has, in a multitude of ways, been part of passing on a distinctly Dakota futurity here in our homelands. Someone who is not only a brilliant storyteller or knowledge keeper or seed protector, but also a joy and honor to work alongside. Not to mention a generous graduate education letter of recommendation writer. Diane Wilson, Dakota, is a writer, educator, and environmental advocate who has published 4 award-winning books as well as essays in numerous publications. Wilson's recent novel, The Seed Keeper, published by Milkweed Editions, was awarded the 2022 Minnesota Book Award for Fiction. Her memoir, Spirit Car, Journey to a Dakota Past, from Borealis Books, won a 2006 Minnesota Book Award and was selected for the 2012 One Minneapolis, One Read program. Her 2011 nonfiction book, Beloved Child, A Dakota Way of Life, also from Borealis Books, was awarded the 2012 Barbara Sudler Award from History, Colorado. Wilson's middle grade biography, Ella Cara Deloria, Dakota Language Protector, was an honor selection for the 2022 American Indian Youth Literature Award. She's a co-author of a 2022 picture book, Where We Come From. Her most recent essays, which explore seed advocacy, food sovereignty, social justice, and cultural recovery, have been featured in acclaimed anthologies: Kinship, Belonging in a World of Relations, We Are Meant to Rise, Voices for Justice from Minneapolis to the World, and A Good Time for the Truth, Race in Minnesota. Wilson is the former executive director for the Native American Food Sovereignty Alliance, a national coalition of tribes and organizations working to support food sovereignty, and Dream of Wild Health, a Native-led farm. Wilson is a Mdewakantuan descendant enrolled on the Rosebud Reservation. She lives near the St. Croix River in Minnesota, where she cares for an indigenous seed garden, native perennials for pollinators, and a tamarack bog. So please extend your warmest gratitude to the wonderful Diane Wilson. Pidam Yayepi.